It was a quiet afternoon, one of those typical days that you think will just pass by like any other. A day where nothing extraordinary is supposed to happen, but sometimes that's exactly when life throws its most unexpected surprises at us. And today, it was no different. In a busy city, on a crowded bus filled with the usual mix of commuters, one encounter would soon turn into an unforgettable moment for two strangers, one a black teenager, just trying to get to his destination, and the other, a pregnant woman, whose day was about to take a turn that neither of them saw coming. The bus was nearly full when he stepped on, his worn-out sneakers hitting the pavement as he entered, scanning for a place to sit. The teenager, tall for his age, with an athletic build, was quiet, his eyes scanning the bus for an empty seat. He didn't want to make a scene, didn't want to draw attention to himself. But then, his gaze landed on her. She was sitting in the middle of the bus, her belly visibly swollen with the weight of impending motherhood. Her face was pale, and she looked tired, maybe a little stressed. The lines around her eyes hinted at the struggles of carrying a child in a world that could be unforgiving to anyone, but especially a woman with so many challenges ahead of her. Without hesitation, the teenager, whose name we'll get to in a moment, stood up and moved toward her. He didn't think twice. His actions were instinctive, driven by a deep sense of respect, kindness, and empathy. He offered her his seat. The woman looked up, surprised. She didn't expect that from a stranger, especially not from a teenager who could have easily just ignored her like most people on public transport. But there he was, offering her the comfort of a seat while standing in the aisle, waiting. She looked at him, eyes wide, unsure of how to respond. But she managed a smile, a soft and grateful one. She sat down, feeling a weight lifted from her tired legs. What happened next, though, would completely change the course of both their lives. As the bus rolled along its usual route, the woman took out a small piece of paper from her bag. She scribbled something quickly, folded it, and handed it to him. The teenager hesitated at first, unsure of what to expect, but she urged him to take it. He did, and as he unfolded the note, he read something that made his heart stop. It wasn't just a note of thanks or a simple good luck. No, what he found on that paper was something that would alter his future in ways he never imagined. It was a note that would challenge his views on kindness, on fate, and on the power of small acts of compassion. But that's not where the story ends. In fact, it's only just beginning. You see, the note wasn't just an ordinary message. The woman, as it turned out, was no ordinary person herself. In fact, she wasn't just any random passenger on that bus. The woman, whose name was Rebecca, was a successful lawyer. And the teenager, whose name was Jamal, had no idea how this one simple, kind act would lead to a connection between them that neither of them could have foreseen. Jamal didn't think much about the note at first. It didn't fully hit him until later when he took the time to read it again. Rebecca, it seemed, had recognized something in him, something that most people would have overlooked. She had seen the potential, the drive, and the heart of a young man who had a world of possibilities ahead of him, if only he had the right opportunities. The note was an invitation, a chance for him to change the course of his life. It was an offer that could open doors he had only dreamed of. But there was a catch. What Jamal didn't know at the time was that his life was about to intersect with someone else's in a way that no one could have predicted. Later that same day, while Jamal was still processing the note, something completely unexpected happened. A powerful, wealthy lawyer, known for his influence in the community, was stopped by a white police officer. The officer, without any real evidence, accused the lawyer of stealing a car he had just bought. And that's when things took a dramatic turn. Jamal had no idea that the white police officer involved in the incident was about to play a crucial role in his journey. The powerful black lawyer, whose name was Marcus, had no idea that the teenager he had just encountered would soon be the key to his own fight for justice. It would be this moment, this life-changing event, that would set in motion a chain of events that no one could have predicted. But the real question is, how would Jamal respond? How would he navigate the challenges ahead, knowing that his future was tied to people he had just met and a world that had long been divided by race, privilege, and power? What would Rebecca do with her new insight into Jamal's potential? Would she offer him the help she promised in that note? Or would she become entangled in a situation that was much bigger than either of them could have anticipated? And what role would Marcus, the powerful lawyer, play in this story? The tension was building, the stakes were higher than ever, and everyone was about to discover just how one small act of kindness can change the trajectory of a life. But that's a story for the next chapter, because the adventure is just beginning, and the real question is, who will come out on top when fate, race, and justice collide? Stay tuned, because you won't want to miss what happens next. Jamal sat on the bus, the folded note clutched in his hand, still trying to make sense of what had just happened. He could hardly believe it. A stranger, a woman he had just met, offering him a chance like that. His mind raced as the bus made its way through the city. He was used to seeing life pass by in a blur, streets, buildings, and people all blurring together as he lost himself in his thoughts. But today, it felt different. Today, everything felt significant. As the bus reached his stop, he hesitated. Part of him wanted to jump off and run home, to put the note out of his mind and forget about it. It would be easier that way. But something in him resisted. The feeling of possibility lingered, like the quiet hum of electricity in the air, just before a storm. Maybe he was being naive, overthinking it, but he couldn't shake the sense that his life was at a crossroads. He stepped off the bus and walked the few blocks to his apartment, his heart still racing. His mother would be at work, and his little sister, Maria, would probably be in her room, buried in a book or watching cartoons. They lived in a modest building, nothing fancy, but it was home. The place was always loud with the sounds of life, whether it was the laughter of his younger sister, his mother singing to herself as she cleaned, or the arguments that seemed to erupt between the tenants every now and then. As Jamal entered their apartment, he was greeted by the usual chaos. Maria was sprawled on the couch, holding a tablet, her eyes glued to the screen. His mother, a strong woman who had worked multiple jobs to give her children a better life, was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of something that smelled like dinner. "Hey, Ma," Jamal said, slipping off his shoes and sitting at the table. "Hey, baby," his mother replied, not looking up. "How was school?" Jamal sighed and leaned back in his chair. "School was fine," he muttered. "Same old stuff." His mother raised an eyebrow but didn't press. She knew him well enough to sense when something was on his mind, but she also knew he had a tendency to keep things to himself. "What's wrong, Jamal?" she asked, finally turning around. He hesitated, unsure if he should tell her about the note. It felt too big, too much to explain in just a few words. He didn't want to get her hopes up, only to have everything fall apart. But at the same time, he couldn't ignore the pull he felt inside, like something was about to change, something was pushing him toward a new chapter. "I met someone today," he said after a long pause. His mother set the spoon down and looked at him with interest. "Who?" "A woman on the bus," Jamal continued. "She's a lawyer. She gave me a note." His mother's face softened. "A note?" "Yeah," Jamal said, pulling the folded paper out of his pocket. "She told me I had potential, that I should take this chance, whatever it is." He handed the note to his mother, who unfolded it carefully. The words were brief but powerful, written with the kind of urgency that Jamal hadn't expected from a stranger. "You have the heart of a champion," the note read. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I can help you. Meet me at my office tomorrow." His mother read the note twice, then looked up at Jamal. "What do you think this means?" "I don't know," he said, his voice low. "But it feels like something real, like something I've been waiting for." His mother nodded, her eyes narrowing in thought. She'd seen a lot in her time, both the good and the bad. She'd worked hard to make sure her kids had every opportunity, but she knew the world wasn't always kind to people like them. The system was stacked against them, and it wasn't easy to rise above the noise. Still, she believed in her son. She believed in the fire inside him, the same fire that had pushed him to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult. "You have to think carefully," she said after a moment. "Opportunities like this, they don't come around often. But you have to be sure. You can't trust everyone." Jamal nodded, understanding her concern. He wasn't a fool. He knew the world could be full of hidden agendas, and he wasn't about to jump into something he didn't fully understand. But something about the woman's words felt different. She wasn't offering him money or favors. She was offering him a chance to prove himself, to be someone more than just the kid from the block. The next morning, Jamal found himself standing outside a sleek office building in the heart of the city, looking up at the glass and steel structure that seemed to tower over him. He had never been inside a building like this before, and the contrast between his life and the world he was about to enter made him feel small. But he was determined. He took a deep breath and pushed through the revolving door. Inside, the lobby was quiet and pristine. Polished floors, modern artwork, and well-dressed professionals walking briskly from one end to the other. Jamal felt out of place, like an intruder in someone else's world. He walked up to the receptionist, his nerves getting the best of him for a moment. "Can I help you?" the receptionist asked, eyeing him curiously. "I'm here to see Ms. Rebecca." Jamal trailed off, unsure of the last name. "Rebecca Lee?" the receptionist asked, glancing at the computer screen. Jamal nodded. "Please have a seat," the receptionist said, pointing to a row of chairs. "Ms. Lee will be with you shortly." Jamal sat down, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to step into something that would change everything. Just a few hours ago, he was sitting on the bus, barely thinking about the future. Now, here he was, in a corporate building, about to meet a lawyer who believed in him for reasons he didn't fully understand. A few minutes passed, and the door to the office opened. Rebecca Lee walked in, her heels clicking against the floor, her professional demeanor unmistakable. She was everything Jamal hadn't expected, a woman of authority, confidence, and grace. But there was something in her eyes, a glimmer of warmth, that told him she wasn't just a lawyer. She was someone who saw people, really saw them. "Jamal, I'm glad you could make it," she said, extending her hand. Jamal stood up, shaking her hand, still unsure of where this would lead. But as they exchanged a brief smile, he felt a sense of calm wash over him. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something extraordinary. But as the conversation began and Rebecca started to explain why she had reached out to him, Jamal's thoughts drifted to the one thing he couldn't shake, the incident with the police officer and Marcus, the black lawyer accused of a crime he didn't commit. What did all this have to do with him? And how were his actions, his decisions, connected to the bigger picture? He didn't know it yet, but he was about to find out. And the answers would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself, his community, and the world he was just starting to understand. As Jamal sat down across from Rebecca, he tried to focus on what she was saying, but his mind kept drifting back to the scene with Marcus and the police officer. He couldn't shake the image of the lawyer, his calm demeanor in the face of such blatant injustice. He didn't know Marcus personally, but he had heard his name around the neighborhood. Everyone knew he was successful, respected, and, above all, someone who fought for what was right. Yet, even someone like Marcus could find himself caught up in a mess like this. Rebecca's voice pulled him back to the present, and he quickly refocused. She was explaining something about mentorship, about how she saw potential in him, and how she thought he could be something more. Jamal had heard this kind of talk before, motivational speeches, inspiring words meant to light a fire inside him. But this time, it felt different. There was sincerity in Rebecca's voice that made him listen closely. "I see a lot of promise in you, Jamal," she said. "But you need to understand something. People like you, people like us, don't always get a fair shot. I've seen it firsthand. The world isn't just, especially for people like you, who don't have the same privileges that others do. But that doesn't mean it's impossible." Jamal shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He had heard those words before too, but they always came with a sense of resignation, as though acknowledging the obstacles was enough to accept them. But Rebecca didn't seem resigned. She seemed determined to help him, to change the narrative for him, to make sure he wasn't another statistic. The conversation drifted from aspirations to reality, and Jamal began to feel the weight of what Rebecca was offering him. She wasn't just offering him a chance to rise above the challenges he faced. She was offering him the tools to fight back against a system that seemed designed to keep him down. She spoke about her work, about the cases she'd taken on, about the things she had seen as a lawyer for those who often had no voice. And with every word, Jamal could feel something inside him stir, a sense of purpose, something he hadn't felt in years. Maybe this was his shot. Maybe, for the first time in his life, someone believed in him enough to offer him more than just words. But just as the conversation began to feel like it was heading in a direction Jamal couldn't quite grasp, a thought crossed his mind that he couldn't shake. What about Marcus? Why had the lawyer been targeted by the police officer in the first place? Why had they been so quick to accuse him without any evidence? And why had that encounter occurred right after Jamal had received the note from Rebecca? As if reading his mind, Rebecca paused and looked at him with a measured expression. "I know you're probably wondering why I'm offering you this opportunity," she said softly. "But you need to understand something. You're not just here because of your potential. You're here because of what you represent. You represent the fight against everything that's wrong in this city. You represent the fight for justice." Jamal's heart skipped a beat. What was she saying? "What do you mean?" Rebecca leaned in, her voice lower now, as though sharing something secret. "The officer who pulled over Marcus, accusing him of stealing a car? That wasn't just a random incident. It's part of a pattern. The police have been targeting people like Marcus for years. And Marcus isn't the only one who's been harassed by them. There's a whole network of injustice here. And you," she paused, eyes narrowing, "you've been pulled into it, whether you realize it or not." Jamal felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Was Rebecca implying that his encounter with Marcus was more than just a coincidence? Was there something larger at play here that he didn't understand yet? Rebecca saw his confusion and sighed, sitting back in her chair. "I didn't want to involve you in all of this, Jamal. But I can't ignore what happened when I saw you on that bus. You did something most people wouldn't have done. You showed kindness when others might have turned away. And that tells me something. It tells me you're capable of understanding a bigger picture." Jamal's mind was spinning. He didn't know what to make of all of this. One moment, he was just a kid on the bus trying to get through his day, and the next he was sitting across from a lawyer who was asking him to become part of something bigger, a fight against a corrupt system that had already set its sights on people like Marcus, and by extension, people like him. He opened his mouth to ask more questions, but before he could speak, Rebecca's phone buzzed on the desk, pulling her attention away from him. She glanced at it quickly, her eyes tightening just a little. "I'm sorry," she said, excusing herself for a moment. "I have to take this." Jamal nodded, but he felt the growing unease in his gut. There was something else, something deeper, that Rebecca wasn't telling him. Maybe she didn't trust him enough yet, or maybe she was just trying to protect him from the full extent of the danger that surrounded this case. But Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that the situation was more complicated than she was letting on. As Rebecca stepped out of the room to take her call, Jamal sat there alone, his thoughts whirling. His eyes wandered around the office, taking in the sleek furniture, the polished floors, the piles of legal documents stacked neatly on the desk. It all felt so far removed from the world he knew, his neighborhood, his friends, his family. It felt like he was standing on the edge of two worlds, one foot in each. His mind kept returning to the scene with the police officer. He'd never seen anything like that before. The way the officer had accused Marcus without any reason, the way he had been so quick to jump to conclusions, it was a clear display of the systemic bias that ran deep in the city. Jamal had always known it existed, but seeing it firsthand was something else entirely. He felt a mix of anger and fear bubbling up inside him. What if the system had its sights set on him, too? What if he was just one step away from becoming another victim of the system's cruelty? The door opened suddenly, pulling him out of his thoughts. Rebecca had returned, her expression more serious now. "I'm afraid I have to cut this meeting short, Jamal," she said, her tone shifting. "Something's come up. But I want you to think carefully about what I've said. I'll be in touch soon." Jamal stood up, feeling the weight of the conversation settle on him. He didn't know what to make of everything he had just heard. There were too many questions, too many unknowns. But one thing was clear, his life was changing, and the choices he made in the coming days would determine which direction that change would take. As he left the office building, Jamal felt the weight of the city around him. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the streets. He knew he had to make a decision, but what was the right choice? Should he take the chance Rebecca was offering him? Or was he being pulled into something much bigger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined? Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. The tension that had been building inside him since he first received the note from Rebecca had only grown stronger. Every step he took, every thought he had, felt like he was walking a tightrope, balancing between the choices laid before him and the consequences of making the wrong move. As he walked back through the city streets, his mind kept circling back to the phone call Rebecca had taken in the middle of their conversation. He hadn't heard the words, but he'd seen her reaction, how her face had hardened, her eyes narrowing with some kind of unspoken realization. It was a subtle shift, but Jamal had learned long ago to pay attention to those moments when people let their guard down, even just for a second. There was something she wasn't telling him, and it made him feel like he was being pulled into a web he didn't fully understand. The more he thought about Marcus and the police officer, the more it all started to make sense, or at least it seemed like it did. Marcus was targeted because of the same reasons so many others were. His skin, his success, his power. The system wasn't made for people like him, and the fact that he was a lawyer who fought against the very system that oppressed people like him made him a target. Jamal didn't know all the details, but he knew the pattern when he saw it. It was the same in his neighborhood, the same in his life. People who had nothing were always looking over their shoulder, waiting for something to go wrong. But when you had something to lose, like Marcus did, the stakes were even higher. By the time he got home that night, Jamal felt more uncertain than ever. His mother was already asleep, and the apartment felt quieter than usual, the silence amplifying the storm inside his head. He pulled out the note from Rebecca again and read it over for the 100th time. He could still feel the weight of her words, the promise of something more, the possibility of a future beyond what he could see for himself. But at the same time, a nagging doubt lingered. Was he getting in over his head? Was there a deeper risk to this offer than he realized? The next morning, Jamal's phone rang just as he was finishing his breakfast. He didn't recognize the number, but something told him it was important. He answered, his heart pounding. "Jamal?" It was Rebecca's voice, tense and urgent. "I need to see you.
Now.
You need to come to my office." His stomach tightened at the sound of her voice. There was something off about her tone, something that made him feel like he was about to be pulled into the heart of a storm. "I'm on my way," Jamal replied, trying to keep his voice steady. He didn't ask what was going on. He didn't need to. He knew that whatever was happening, it was big, and it was coming for him. When he arrived at the office, the air felt thick with tension. The receptionist greeted him quickly, her smile fading when she saw his expression. She didn't say anything, just gestured toward the door to Rebecca's office. Jamal walked through, his mind racing, his nerves on edge. Rebecca was standing by the window, staring out at the city below. She didn't turn when he entered, and for a moment, the room was silent, as if they were both waiting for something to happen. Finally, Rebecca spoke, her voice low and grave. "I didn't want to drag you into this, Jamal, but it's too late now." She turned to face him, her expression sharp. "Marcus's case is bigger than we thought. The police officer who pulled him over wasn't just doing his job. He was part of a larger network, one that's been operating in the shadows for a long time." Jamal's heart raced. He'd known something was off, but hearing it from Rebecca made it real, and the reality hit him hard. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Rebecca stepped closer, her eyes never leaving his. "The officer who accused Marcus of stealing that car? He's involved in something much bigger. There's a corruption within the police force, a network of officers who've been targeting people like Marcus, people with power, with influence. They're trying to silence anyone who stands in their way. But it's not just Marcus. It's you, too. They know you're connected to this somehow, Jamal. They know about the note, and they're watching you." Jamal felt a chill run down his spine. He hadn't realized the extent of what he was getting involved in. He had thought he was just helping Marcus, just trying to do the right thing by standing up for someone who was being wronged. But now, it felt like he was tangled in a web he didn't fully understand, a web that was closing in around him with each passing second. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice trembling with uncertainty. Rebecca's eyes hardened. "We fight back. We take them down. But we can't do it alone. That's why I need you, Jamal. You have the kind of influence that people like me can't reach. You're a voice for the people who don't have one. If we can expose what's really going on, if we can get the truth out there, we can end this. But it's dangerous. And you need to be ready for what comes next." Jamal took a step back, his mind reeling. He had never asked for any of this. He had never imagined his life would take such a turn. The fight for justice, the power of standing up for what was right, it was all too big, too overwhelming for someone like him. But then he remembered the look in Marcus's eyes when he had been falsely accused, the helplessness, the frustration. He remembered the kindness he had shown the pregnant woman on the bus, how something so simple had started this chain of events. He couldn't turn back now. Not when so much was at stake. "Let's do it," Jamal said, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "I'm in." Rebecca gave him a small, approving nod. "Good. But you need to understand something. There's no turning back once we start. They're not going to give up easily. And when we expose them, the stakes will rise even higher. They'll come after us." Jamal nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what he had just signed up for, but he knew it was too late to walk away now. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and the fight for justice was about to reach its breaking point. Whatever was coming, it was going to be intense. But one thing was clear: Jamal had just stepped into a battle where the consequences would be felt far beyond anything he could have imagined. The phone rang again, interrupting the tension in the room. Rebecca answered it immediately, her face going pale as she listened. Jamal could feel the shift in the air, the sense that everything was moving towards something inevitable, something that was about to explode. Rebecca ended the call quickly, her hand gripping the phone tightly. "They're making their move," she said, her voice low. "And we're running out of time." Jamal's pulse quickened. He knew what that meant. The final showdown was coming, and it was going to be a fight for everything they had. Jamal's heart was pounding in his chest as Rebecca's words sank in. The phone call, the warning, it felt like a ticking time bomb, the pressure mounting with each passing second. But just as he was about to ask her what they needed to do next, there was a knock at the door. It was sharp, urgent, and it sent a jolt of panic through his veins. Rebecca froze, her eyes locking with Jamal's. Without a word, she motioned for him to stay quiet, stepping slowly toward the door, her movements deliberate, cautious. Jamal's mind raced. Who could it be? The police? Someone sent by the officers who had been targeting Marcus? Or worse, someone from the corrupt network Rebecca had mentioned? She peeked through the small window beside the door, her face paling even more. "Stay low," she whispered urgently, before slipping out of the room and closing the door softly behind her. Jamal crouched down, his breath shallow as he tried to make sense of the situation. What was happening? He just agreed to stand with Rebecca, to fight against a corrupt system, but now it felt like everything was spiraling out of control. He couldn't sit back. He had to know what was going on. He moved toward the door quietly, inching closer to the small gap between the door and the frame. Through it, he could hear muffled voices, then the sound of footsteps retreating down the hall. It wasn't until he heard the faint click of a door shutting in the distance that he dared to stand up and approach the door. He slowly opened it a crack, peering out into the hallway, trying to see if anyone was still around. Rebecca's office was at the end of a long corridor, and the hall was empty now, save for a few desks left behind by the evening shift. But as Jamal stepped out into the hallway, his attention was immediately drawn to something unusual. A man in a dark coat walking quickly toward the exit, his face hidden behind a pair of sunglasses despite the late hour. Jamal couldn't see his face, but something about him seemed off. He didn't belong here. There was no reason for someone like him to be in a law office at this hour. His gut told him this was no coincidence, and it made his blood run cold. Without thinking, Jamal moved quickly, ducking into a nearby office to stay out of sight. His heart raced, his mind spinning with questions. Was this person connected to the officers Rebecca had warned him about? What was he doing here? And why had Rebecca gone so quiet when she saw him? He waited in the darkened office, barely breathing, his eyes glued to the hallway, waiting for the man to leave. Time seemed to slow, the air thick with anticipation. Every sound felt amplified, the soft hum of the lights above, the distant footsteps echoing through the building. And then, just as Jamal was about to step out from his hiding spot, he saw something that made his heart skip a beat. The man was talking to someone else, someone Jamal hadn't expected to see here. It was the same police officer who had confronted Marcus in the parking lot the day before. The one who had accused him of stealing the car. Jamal's stomach dropped. What was going on? He had never expected to see the officer in this context, let alone speaking with someone like this. His mind raced to piece together the growing puzzle. Was this officer working with a mysterious man? And what had they been talking about? He strained to hear their conversation, but couldn't make out the words. All he could see were their gestures, quick, deliberate, and hushed, as though they were afraid of being overheard. The officer's body language was tense, like he was trying to keep something from getting out of hand. And the other man, he was calm, too calm, as though whatever they were discussing wasn't just business as usual. It was serious. Jamal had to act. He couldn't just stand there and watch. He needed answers, and fast. He didn't know if it was the right decision, but he knew he had no other choice. He slipped out of the office quietly, moving as fast as he could without making a sound. By the time he reached the corner of the building, the two men were already gone. But Jamal wasn't going to let it end there. He had a bad feeling, one that told him he was getting closer to something dangerous, something that would change everything. If he didn't find out what was happening, it could be too late. His phone buzzed in his pocket, breaking the silence. He jumped, startled by the sudden noise. It was a message from Rebecca. Get out of here. Now. Jamal's mind raced. Why was she telling him to leave? Was she in danger? He had no time to waste. He couldn't just follow orders anymore. He needed to figure out what was going on. He dialed her number quickly, but it went straight to voicemail. Panic started to build up inside him, but he forced himself to focus. There had to be an answer to all this. He wasn't just a pawn in someone else's game. He wasn't just some kid who stumbled into this fight by accident. He had a role to play, and he would find out what it was, no matter the cost. Just as he was about to turn the corner to leave the building, he froze. From the shadows, someone was watching him. A figure stepped forward, their face barely visible in the dim light. Jamal's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't Rebecca. It wasn't the man from earlier. It was Marcus. But something about him was different. His eyes were wide, wild, even like he was running from something or someone. And his clothes were disheveled, his face drawn with exhaustion. Jamal, Marcus whispered urgently, his voice shaking. You don't know what you're dealing with. They're coming for you. They're coming for both of us. Before Jamal could react, Marcus grabbed his arm, pulling him toward the back exit. We don't have time, he said, glancing nervously over his shoulder. Get out of here, while you still can. Jamal's mind was spinning. What was Marcus talking about? Who was after them? And why was Marcus suddenly so scared? He had no answers, only one truth. The stakes had just escalated beyond anything he could have imagined. Jamal's mind was racing as Marcus dragged him through the back exit of the building. His feet barely touched the ground, his body propelled by an urgency he couldn't understand. Every part of him screamed that something wasn't right. The stakes had been raised beyond anything he could have imagined, but now, as Marcus pulled him through darkened alleys, it felt like they were being hunted. The truth was too close, too dangerous, and the people chasing them wouldn't stop until it was buried. We need to move fast, Marcus muttered, his voice strained. They're already onto us. You don't know how deep this goes, Jamal. You don't know who's pulling the strings. Jamal's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in shallow bursts. Who's after us, Marcus? What are you talking about? But Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he glanced behind them, his face drawn tight with fear. The sound of footsteps echoed behind them, growing louder by the second. Jamal's instincts kicked in, his body pushing harder to match Marcus's pace. They rounded another corner, but Jamal couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The shadows of the night seemed to close in around them. No matter how fast they ran, they couldn't escape the growing sense of dread. Suddenly, Marcus stopped dead in his tracks. Jamal was about to ask him what was going on when he saw it. A black SUV slowly rolling up the street, the headlights casting an eerie glow across the dark alley. The vehicle came to a stop just a few feet away, and Jamal's stomach dropped. He could see the silhouette of a man inside, staring directly at them through the windshield. Before Jamal could react, the door of the SUV opened with a sharp click. And then, standing before him, was the very officer who had accused Marcus of stealing the car. But this time, he wasn't alone. Two more officers flanked him, their faces grim and unreadable. Jamal's breath hitched. You were part of this all along?" he asked, the realization hitting him like a wave. The officer gave a small, cold smile. "We were never the ones in control, Jamal. You were always part of the bigger picture." Jamal's mind spun, trying to make sense of the words. What was he talking about? How had he been part of something he didn't even know existed? Marcus stood frozen, his body tense with fear and anger. "What is this, detective? What do you want with us?" The officer's smile widened. "It's not just about you two. It's about everyone who thinks they can make a difference. People like you, Marcus, people like Jamal. You think you're fighting for justice, but you're just pawns in a much larger game." Jamal felt the words like a punch to the gut. He couldn't make sense of it. His head was spinning. He had thought he was on the right side, helping Marcus, trying to fight against a system that was broken. But now, it seemed like there was a deeper game at play, one that he didn't understand. The officer stepped closer, his gaze never leaving Jamal. "You thought you were doing the right thing, but you were just being played. This whole thing, the car, the accusations, the corruption, it's all part of a much bigger plan. A plan that's already set in motion." Before Jamal could process what he was hearing, Marcus stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You think you can control me? You think I'm just going to stand here and let you walk all over me?" The officer didn't flinch. "It's not just about you, Marcus. It's about keeping people like you quiet. People who are too powerful, too dangerous. You and Jamal are threats to the system. The truth, it's never meant to be exposed." Jamal could feel the weight of the words settle over him. The pieces were starting to come together, but they made everything more confusing than ever. What had he been caught up in? What had he just agreed to fight? Then, in an unexpected move, Marcus lunged at the officer, grabbing him by the collar. For a moment, everything seemed to stop. The officers were caught off guard, their hands hovering over their weapons, but they didn't make a move. "What is this really about, officer?" Marcus growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Who's pulling your strings?" The officer's face twitched with a flicker of irritation, but he didn't answer. Instead, he motioned to his partners. One of them stepped forward, his hand slipping into his coat pocket, and for a second, Jamal thought he saw a glimmer of metal. But before anything could happen, the officer spoke again, his voice softer this time. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be," he said. "It's already too late." Jamal's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. Something was off, too off. The officer was too calm, too controlled. The threat felt different, colder than before. And then, with a sudden flash of understanding, it hit him. It wasn't the police officers who were controlling this. It was something bigger, something deeper. The officer's smirk faded for a split second, replaced by an expression of quiet resignation. And then, he did something that completely threw Jamal off balance. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope, handing it to Marcus. "This," the officer said, his voice no longer cold or condescending but almost tired. "This is everything you need to know." Marcus looked down at the envelope, hesitating for a moment before he took it. The tension in the air was palpable, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Jamal watched as Marcus opened the envelope and pulled out a series of photographs and documents. He flipped through them quickly, his face going pale with each page. Jamal couldn't see what was on the pages, but he didn't need to. The shock on Marcus's face told him everything he needed to know. "It's the truth," Marcus muttered, his voice shaking. "They've been setting us up all along, and it's bigger than we thought." Before Jamal could ask what that meant, the officer turned to leave, his footsteps echoing in the silence. "You have what you need," he said. "Use it wisely. You've been warned." The sound of the SUV driving off faded into the night, and for a moment, Jamal and Marcus stood there, both trying to process what had just happened. Everything they thought they knew had been turned upside down, the stakes higher than ever before. But one thing was certain. The fight wasn't over. The truth had just begun to unfold, and the real battle was only just beginning. And then, as if on cue, Jamal's phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a new message from Rebecca. "It's not over yet. You need to be ready." Jamal's pulse quickened. Whatever was coming next, he had no choice but to face it head-on. The game was bigger than he had ever imagined, and now he was in the middle of it. Equals. Jamal stared at his phone, the message from Rebecca burning in his hand. "It's not over yet. You need to be ready." The words echoed in his mind, sending a chill down his spine. What did she mean by that? Hadn't everything just come to a head? Hadn't they just been warned? Yet, as much as he tried to push the thought away, he couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was only beginning. Marcus was still standing by the alley wall, the manila envelope crumpled in his hand. His face was pale, and his fingers trembled as he slowly sifted through the photographs and documents. Jamal stepped closer, watching him closely. "Marcus," Jamal said quietly. "What's in the envelope? What's going on?" Marcus let out a heavy breath, glancing at Jamal before shaking his head slowly. "I wish I could explain it to you all at once, but it's too much. What we've uncovered isn't just about a corrupt officer or even the bad decisions being made by a few people in power. This goes deeper, much deeper than we ever thought." He ran his hand through his hair in frustration. There are networks, hidden alliances, powerful figures pulling strings. And the worst part is, we're only scratching the surface. Jamal felt the weight of the words sink in. Everything he'd thought he understood, about justice, about truth, even about the struggle they'd been fighting, had just been turned upside down. It wasn't as simple as right and wrong. It wasn't just about proving Marcus's innocence or exposing the corruption within the police force. This was about something much bigger, something far more dangerous. "I don't get it," Jamal said, struggling to grasp what Marcus was trying to say. "Are we just supposed to sit here and let them get away with it?" "No," Marcus replied firmly. "We fight. But we need to be smart about it. We've got the truth now, Jamal. These documents, they tell a story. A story of the real puppet masters who've been manipulating things for years. We can't just take them head-on with brute force. We need allies. We need a plan." The quiet urgency in Marcus's voice had Jamal feeling more uncertain than ever. The fight they were up against seemed impossible now. They weren't just dealing with a few crooked cops. They were facing a network that stretched far beyond what either of them could handle on their own. Marcus looked at Jamal, his eyes filled with determination. "We'll go public. We'll share what we've found, but we need to be strategic. Rebecca's right. This won't be easy. They won't just back off." Jamal nodded slowly, feeling a spark of hope rise in his chest. Maybe they could do this. Maybe they could stand up against the forces that sought to control their lives and silence the truth. But he knew it wouldn't come without sacrifice. This battle would cost them more than they could imagine. "We'll do it together," Jamal said quietly, his voice full of resolve. "We've come this far, and we're not turning back now." Before Marcus could respond, Jamal's phone buzzed again. It was another message from Rebecca. "I've arranged a meeting with someone who can help. Get to the park in 20 minutes. It's time to put everything into motion." Jamal's heart raced. Whoever this person was, they were either incredibly brave or incredibly reckless. But he knew one thing. This was their chance to take everything they'd learned and turn it into action. "Marcus," Jamal said, turning to him. "Rebecca's set up a meeting. We need to go now." Together, they left the alley, moving quickly but cautiously. The city around them was quiet now, the sounds of traffic and distant voices muted in the night. The streets seemed empty, but Jamal knew that they were being watched. They had to be careful. Their enemies were out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. When they arrived at the park, They found Rebecca standing near a bench, her eyes scanning the surroundings. She looked up as they approached, her expression serious but resolute. "You made it," she said quietly, her gaze flicking toward the shadows. "We don't have much time. The person I've arranged to meet has connections to the media, to politicians, even to people in law enforcement. They can help us get this information to the right people." Jamal felt a flicker of hope rise within him. Maybe, just maybe, they had a chance to make a difference, to expose the corruption that had run rampant through their system for so long. As if on cue, a black car pulled up to the curb, its engine purring softly in the night. A man stepped out, his tall figure silhouetted against the headlights. He was dressed in a sharp suit, his face obscured by the darkness, but there was something about him that made Jamal's gut tighten. The man walked toward them without a word, his eyes scanning each of them before settling on Marcus. "Marcus, I assume?" The man's voice was calm, measured. "I've been briefed on your situation. I'm here to help, but understand this. The road ahead won't be easy. It never is when you take on people like the ones you're dealing with." Marcus nodded. "We know. We've got the documents. We've got the proof. We need your help to expose them." The man reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, sleek device. "I've got the connections you need to get this into the hands of people who can make a difference. But you need to be prepared. Once the truth gets out, there's no going back. Lives will change, careers will be destroyed, and those in power won't go down without a fight." Jamal felt a wave of uncertainty wash over him. It was one thing to fight against corrupt police officers. It was another to take on a network that controlled everything: media, law enforcement, even the political system. The risks were massive. But what was the alternative? Letting these people continue to operate in the shadows? "You're right," Jamal said, his voice steady now. "But we've come too far to back down." The man looked at him, his gaze thoughtful, and then nodded. "Good. I'll make sure this information gets to the right places. But you need to lay low for a while. Stay off the radar. Let the process unfold. Trust me, the truth will come to light, but only if you're patient." As the man turned to leave, Jamal watched him disappear into the night, the weight of the moment settling in. He and Marcus had done their part. They had exposed the lies, unearthed the secrets, and brought the truth to the surface. But the fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Jamal looked at Marcus and Rebecca, both of them silent but resolute. They had started this journey together, and they would finish it together, no matter what it took. The city around them seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the storm that was about to break. But Jamal knew this. Whatever came next, they had given the world a chance to see the truth. And in the end, that was all they could do.